I'm Rick Harp. This is your APTN News Brief for Wednesday, April 10th. Ontario Provincial Police have laid charges against a former lawyer with the Thunder Bay Police Service. On Tuesday, OPP's Criminal Investigations Branch announced 5 charges against one-time legal counsel Holly Walbourne. They include 3 counts of obstruction of justice, breach of trust by a public officer, and a charge of obstruct public or peace officer. Back in late 2021, the Provincial Attorney General requested that the OPP investigate allegations of misconduct by members of the Thunder Bay Police. As part of that ongoing investigation, Sergeant Mike Domini was arrested and charged last December with 2 counts of assault and 1 count each of breach of trust by a police officer and obstructing justice. Meanwhile, Walbourne resigned from the Thunder Bay service a year ago. In a statement, her lawyer said, quote, "We are shocked and disappointed that the OPP decided to charge her. We look forward to seeing the OPP's evidence and to defending the case in court," unquote. To southwestern Nova Scotia, where federal fisheries officers arrested a Migma family for illegally harvesting elvers this past weekend, a season the department canceled about a month ago. However, as Angel Moore reports, the family vows to never stop fishing.
Video posted on social media shows John Paul, his daughter, niece, and grandson arrested for unauthorized elver fishing. This comes 2 weeks after 2 Migma fishers in southern Nova Scotia allege fisheries officers left them stranded with no footwear hours from home.
They never took our boots, and they wanted to take our phones, but we wouldn't let them. And if Cheyenne never showed up, we would have had to walk.
That's because DFO officers seized this Jeep as part of their investigation. It belongs to Paul's niece. Another relative, Cheyenne Francis, filmed video when she arrived at the scene.
I got a big knot in my stomach because, you know what? The only reason why they're doing this now is because they know that we do this to feed our families, and they don't like that.
Paul says that will not stop his family from fishing.
We have our own management plan, and we follow that. And on our reserve, our chief and counsel guide us. And that's the way I'm always going to fish. I listen to my chief and counsel. I don't listen to DFO. I'm sorry.
In an act of defiance, the family went back out harvesting elvers Monday night. It was a quiet night with no fisheries officers in sight, but the catch was not as much as they hoped.
We come here to fish elvers, man, and we're going to fish them. It's our treaty right, and we're not going to stop. You could take all the vehicles we have. If we have to get horses and ride horses in here to elver fish, we will.
The federal government closed the 2024 elver fishing season, citing conservation and safety. Francis questions the closure and says safety is an issue when the Migma harvest lobster.
But yet they're going to close down this season for elverts because of safety. Why didn't they do that in 2020 when it was more of there was more violence being at that period of time in 2020 than there was last year or any time on any river?
1 kilogram of elvers can be worth up to $5,000. The Migma harvest elvers to earn a moderate livelihood. Francis says the closure does not impact treaty rights.
Because they close the season down does not mean that our treaty rights has stopped at any given time. Our treaty rights is always going to be there.
The Department of Fisheries and Oceans confirmed to APTN News on April 6, fisheries officers arrested 5 people who are under investigation for violating the Fisheries Act. 1 vehicle was seized, fishing gear, and 2.54 kilograms of elvers were released back into the river. Angel Moore, APTN National News, southwestern Nova Scotia.
A new report on the First Nations infrastructure gap says it will cost just over $349 billion to close the gap by 2030. Released by the Assembly of First Nations in Ottawa this week, the report discusses First Nations needs in housing, roads, climate change adaptation, digital connectivity, and education. Indigenous Services Canada Minister Patty Hajdu was asked about the government's commitment to closing the infrastructure gap over the next 6 years.
That's certainly still the goal. I will say that in order for that to happen, all levels of government, all orders of government, and indeed private sector and the federal government will have to work together. This is a big, big lift. It's not just obviously the investment of money. We talk about $400 billion. Can you imagine if we asked First Nations communities to do all of that infrastructure work right now at the same time? There are practical challenges with infrastructure development in communities that are limited by other factors besides money.
Still in politics, a parliamentary committee continues to look at options for a red dress alert system. Similar to Amber Alerts, it's hoped a red dress alert system could reduce the high numbers of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And witnesses from several Indigenous organizations appeared Tuesday before the Status of Women Committee. A number testified such a system would need to operate 24/7 and be national in scope. Native Council of Nova Scotia President Lorraine Augustine emphasized that the system must be both Indigenous-led and operated.
The command center, I think, as I said before, it has to be run by Indigenous. It has to be 24/7, and it also has to have the guidelines and be there for the family to report that, right? So if it's not Indigenous-led, a lot of times our women, even our families, don't want to call and report because if they say it's an Indigenous woman, they're not going to get the reaction that they want.
And finally, members of Norway House Cree Nation in Manitoba demand answers after RCMP tased a nonverbal teenager with disabilities over the weekend. On Saturday, Norway House RCMP responded to a call that a 16-year-old boy had reportedly threatened to stab a preteen girl. RCMP say the boy refused to show his hands when asked, then produced a large knife, at which point he was tased by an officer. RCMP say it was only later when they realized he has mobility issues. And on Sunday, around 100 people went to the Norway House detachment to protest the RCMP's actions. Joseph Brightnose, an educational assistant who's worked with the boy, says he's nonverbal and uses a walker. He described officers' treatment of the teen as unjustified and unlawful.
There's so much hearsay around this situation, and we're not hearing anything from our leaders. We're not hearing anything from our CMP. We're not hearing anything from the people that know what happened. And that's what's frustrating the family. That's what's frustrating me. That's what's frustrating the community. Nobody really knows what's going on except for what the police are releasing.
And that's your APTN News Brief for Wednesday, April 10th. I'm Rick Harp.